In this lesson, we're going to take a first look at web storage in HTML5. Web storage allows you to store data locally in the browser rather than have to post it back to the web server every time. So you can imagine having a shopping cart where you can use local storage to build up your shopping cart in the browser and then send it to the server when you're ready, instead of having to post each individual item to the server bit by bit. Okay, there are two different types of web storage in HTML5. We have local storage and session storage. And what we'll do first of all is see how you can test whether your browser supports each of these modes. Then, once we've seen that, we'll have a look at a second example which shows how you can store items and retrieve items from local storage and from session storage. Okay, so first things first, let's see how you can test whether your browser supports this mechanism. I have a demo file in my browser, and here's the code in the editor, test web storage support.html. This is in your Video to Brain starter folder, so feel free to have a look. Now, first of all, I have a couple of divs at the bottom of the page where I'll display some messages. I have a div called local storage message area and one called session storage message area, and they will indicate whether or not my browser supports local storage and session storage. So this is what you do. Well, in my function onLoad here, this will be called when the browser loads the web page. I get those two divs, and then I can test whether my browser supports local storage like this, window.localStorage. If your browser supports local storage, your window object will have this property, in which case it'll display this message in the browser window. If your browser doesn't support local storage, then this property will be undefined, in which case I display this message. Okay, so the user will see whether the browser supports local storage or not. And then likewise, for session storage, you can test for its support like this, window.sessionStorage. And a display suitable message here as well. Okay, so let me just remind you what that looked like in Chrome. Browser does support local storage. Browser does support session storage. Now, there's an important point here that you really need to remember when you're using web storage. Web storage works when you download your web pages from a website. If you try to run it off files from your file system, it won't work properly. So in order for this example to work properly, what I've had to do is I've had to download this example page from a web server. Localhost is my local web server. And in order to do that on my particular machine, to be honest, it doesn't really matter which web server you use. I'm using Microsoft IIS. You could equally well use Apache or Tomcat or PHP or any web server, really, but you do have to store your web pages on the web server for this mechanism to work. So on my particular machine, I have Microsoft IIS web server installed, and for that to work, the easiest way is to take the example pages, these are the demo pages from the project file folder, and I've copied those into the web publishing folder for IIS. Okay, so for that, it's inetpub www-root. I've copied the two files into here, and then I've run them via localhost. This is the web publishing folder for IIS web server, and that means that when I have a browser window, I use localhost, it'll retrieve the files through the web server on that folder. Okay, so these are being served up by Microsoft IIS. And just to illustrate, this is Google Chrome, but web storage works as well in Internet Explorer and Firefox, for example. So I have these windows open as well. This is Internet Explorer version 9, and this shows that web storage works on IE9. And then I have Firefox as well. I'll just tab to that window. This is Firefox, and you can see that Firefox also supports local storage and session storage. Okay, great. Now let's take a look at how to store items in local storage and session storage. I'm going to go back into Chrome for that. I have another file open here, access in web storage, and every time I refresh the page, it increments two counters. I have one counter in local storage and a separate counter in session storage. Both counters have the same name, count, but they're stored differently. Local storage will remember the value when I close the window, and session storage will discard the value when I close the window. So let me just illustrate. If I just press F5 a few times, so as you can see here, each counter is being incremented. But if I close the window, let me take this URL and copy it to the clipboard, and then I'll close the window, and then I'll reopen it again with the same URI. Now that's quite interesting. You can see that the local storage value was retained. It increments it by 1 every time as well, whereas session storage was discarded. And that's the key difference between local storage and session storage. Local storage is like a cookie. It'll be remembered after you close the browser. Session storage is just for the duration of your browser session. As soon as you close the browser, it'll lose the value. So that's more transient in nature. Okay, let's see how this example works then. I'm going to pop back into my editor. And this is the example here, accessing web storage.html. So I have, at the bottom, I have a couple of divs. And each of these divs has a span. This span is going to display the value from local storage. And this span is going to display the value from session storage. Okay, let's pop back up to the top of the example. When the window is loaded, this function will be executed. And first of all, I test whether local storage is supported. And if so, I call a demonstration function called access storage. That's this function down here. That's where all the exciting stuff happens. So into that function, I pass the local storage object first. Second time round, I'll do the same, but this time I'll pass in the session storage object here. So the parameter into the function storage object will either be the local storage object or it'll be the session storage object. Now I can do that because local storage and session storage implement exactly the same API. They both implement an interface called storage, so they have the same functions to access the data from different areas of memory, obviously. Okay, so that's it. So I'll call the access storage function first time through. I'll specify I want to access local storage, and this is the span where I want to display the counter. So let's come into the function and see what it does. So in this function, first of all, I get the span where I'm going to be displaying the information. And then I show 3 different ways to access an item from storage. You specify the storage object, so that will either be local storage or session storage, remember? And you can say .count. So I have an item called count in session storage or local storage. So this is how you can access an item. You can say dot and then the item name. Or you can call the getItem function and specify the name of the property in quotes, like this. So this will get the item called count. Or you can just use square bracket syntax, like this. Storage object, so that would be local storage or session storage, and then square brackets and the name of the item you want to get. So these 3 approaches are equivalent. It'll retrieve an item called count from either local or session storage. Now obviously, if the item wasn't there, I'd get back undefined. So in this case, I set the value to 0. So this is like initializing the counter to 0 first time through. Every time I run the example, it'll increment the counter using this ++ mechanism here, and then it'll display the value on the web page, and then store the value back in session storage, ready for the next time. Okay, so again, there are 3 different ways to store value in local storage or session storage. You can either take your storage object and say .value like this, or you can use the setItem function like so, specifying the name of the item and the new value, or you can use square bracket syntax like this. So again, all of these 3 ways are equivalent. You can use either one to set a value in your storage. Okay, so that concludes this lesson. We've seen whether you can test whether your browser supports local storage or session storage, and then we've seen how you can access local storage and session storage in a web page and how you can store new values back again.